Welcome back to the channel. In the 1980s, the American home was more than four walls, and a roof. It was the center of daily life, the gathering place where memories were made. The houses themselves weren't extravagant, but they carried a quiet kind of pride. You didn't need marble countertops or open-concept floor plans to feel like you had achieved something. A three-bedroom house with a modest porch and a patch of green out front was enough to feel like you belonged. Most homes were built with real materials: wood, brick, and stone, not the paper-thin walls and prefabricated panels so common today. You could lean against a door and feel the weight of it. Knobs clicked firmly, windows stuck a little in the summer humidity, floors creaked in familiar ways that made the house feel alive. Outside, neighborhoods had character. Each home looked a little different. Some had shutters painted in bold blues or deep reds. Others boasted decorative iron railings or flower boxes overflowing with marigolds. Lawns weren't just a patch of grass, they were a statement. Dads took pride in perfectly edged sidewalks, and kids raced their bikes across driveways without a second thought. On weekends, you could hear the whir of push mowers, the scrape of rakes, and the occasional shout of a neighbor offering a cold beer after the work was done. And there was always the smell. Freshly cut grass, charcoal grills firing up in the evening, gasoline and oil lingering in garages. These scents weren't just background, they were the soundtrack of suburban life. Neighbors weren't anonymous. They weren't just names on a mailbox. They were friends, allies, and sometimes second families. Doors were left unlocked more often than not, and kids roamed freely from one backyard to another. If you needed sugar, flour, or a babysitter, you didn't scroll through an app who walked next door and knocked. Block parties were common. Someone would roll out a grill. Someone else brought coolers of soda and beer. And tables appeared covered with foil pans of baked beans, potato salad, and casseroles. Music drifted from radio's rock country, or Motown, and the adults talked while the kids chased each other until dusk. Halloween was a neighborhood-wide event. Porch lights glowed, streets filled with children in homemade costumes, and parents handed out candy by the handful, not worrying about wrappers or razor blades. At Christmas, whole streets transformed into glowing wonderlands, each house trying to outdo the next with strings of colored bulbs, plastic Santas, and glowing candles in windows. There was a sense of watchfulness, too. Parents looked out for one another's kids. If a child misbehaved down the street, chances were good their mom knew about it before they even got home. It wasn't surveillance, it was community. People cared, and that made neighborhoods feel safe. Step inside a 1980s home, you'd immediately notice the decor. Wood paneling lined the walls in dens and basements, its glossy finish catching the light from a brass lamp with a pleated shade. Shag carpet thick and unruly covered the floors in shades of mustard, rust, or olive. It wasn't always stylish, but it was soft. And kids sprawled on it to watch cartoons or build forts. The living room was the centerpiece. A big, boxy television, cased in a wooden console set like a shrine. Families gathered in front of it for must-see TV, twisting the knobs until the channel came in clearly. Rabbit ear antennas were bent and adjusted constantly, sometimes wrapped in aluminum foil to squeeze out better reception. Coffee tables were stacked with TV guides, Reader's Digest, and ashtrays of if nobody smoked, guests often did. Couch cushions were firm, not the sinking clouds we're used to today, and Afghans knitted by grandmothers draped over the backs of chairs. The kitchen was a kingdom of color. Appliances came in avocado green, harvest gold, or burnt orange. Countertops were laminate, shiny but easily scratched. Cabinets squeaked when opened, and above the sink, a small window often framed the backyard. There was usually a rotary phone on the wall. Its cords stretched from one room to another as teenagers whispered late-night conversations. Tethered but private. The refrigerator was covered in magnet souvenirs from road trips, novelty gifts, or the business card of a plumber, and papered with school schedules, handwritten notes, and the occasional A+ spelling test. Inside, milk came in glass bottles or cardboard cartons. Butter sat in a dish with a lid, and soda cans had pull tabs you peeled all the way off. Evenings had their rhythm. Parents came home from work, often carrying lunch pails or briefcases. Dinner wasn't optional, it was the anchor of the day. Families sat at the same table, eating meals cooked from scratch: meatloaf, pot roast, casseroles, or spaghetti with garlic bread. A pitcher of iced tea or milk sat in the center, and conversations drifted from school grades to work gossip to weekend plans. After dinner, dishes were washed by hands, sometimes with the kids assigned to drying duty. Dishwashers existed, but they weren't as common as today, and many families didn't use them daily. Once the kitchen was clean, families settled into their routines. Parents watched TV, read newspapers, or worked on hobbies. Kids played board games like Monopoly or Sorry, spread puzzles across the floor, or begged for one more show before bed. Bedtime wasn't filled with tablets or streaming. Instead, it was storybooks, nightlights, and the comforting hum of a box fan in the window. Parents tucked kids in, often with a reminder to say prayers. And the house slowly quieted as everyone settled into the rhythm of another day. Asterisk for kids in the 1980s. The home wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a launchpad for imagination. Bedrooms reflected personalities, with posters of rock bands, athletes, or movie characters plastered on the walls. Bedspreads often matched cartoon themes: Transformers, My Little Pony, Star Wars, or Strawberry Shortcake. Glow-in-the-dark stars were stuck to ceilings, and toy chests overflowed with action figures, dolls, and board games. Saturday mornings belonged to cartoons. Children would race out of bed, still in pajamas, sit cross-legged in front of the TV with bowls of cereal Fruit Loops, Cocoa Puffs, or Cap'n Crunch. The jingles from commercials became part of childhood memories. G.I. Joe is there. Or I'm a Toys R Us kid, but most play didn't happen inside. It spilled into the streets and backyards. Kids rode bikes until the tires were bald, climbed trees, and built forts out of scrap wood. Sprinklers became water parks, and slip-and-slides turned lawns into racing lanes. Baseball games were improvised with wiffle balls and duct-taped bats, while basketball hoops with crooked rims stood at the end of nearly every driveway. There were no smartphones, no instant messaging. Friendships were forged face-to-face. If you wanted to see a friend, you hopped on your bike and rode to their house. If they weren't home, you rang another doorbell, or you simply waited until they turned up. Parents didn't hover. They trusted that kids would come home when the streetlights flicked on. And they always did. Entertainment inside the home was simpler, but somehow richer. The television, though bulky and limited to a handful of channels, was treated with reverence. Families gathered for shows like Cheers, Family Ties, or The Cosby Show. When a movie aired on network TV, it was an event. You marked the calendar and made popcorn. VCRs started appearing in living rooms. Often expensive at first, but gradually more common. Renting a VHS tape from the local video store was a family ritual. Rows of shelves filled with colorful covers promised hours of adventure. Some kids remember staring in awe at the horror section, staring each other to pick up the scariest-looking box. Music filled homes, too. Cassette tapes were stacked in plastic cases, and boomboxes blared everything from Michael Jackson to Bon Jovi. Parents still clung to vinyl records, carefully lowering the needle onto spinning discs. Bedrooms often had posters of MTV stars, even if the TV didn't always get the channel clearly. Phones were anchored to walls, cords stretched and tangled from constant use. Call waiting was a luxury, and answering machines with tiny cassette tapes recorded messages in robotic voices. If you missed a call, you didn't know until hours later. That slowness gave life a rhythm. Nothing felt as frantic as today. Summer was alive with open windows, box fans buzzing, and popsicles dripping down kids' wrists. Barbecues filled the air with the smoky scent of burgers and hot dogs. Families piled into station wagons for road trips, luggage strapped to the roof. Drive-in theaters became gathering places on warm nights, with kids in pajamas curled up in the back seat as parents sipped sodas from styrofoam cups. Fall meant raking leaves into giant piles, only for kids to scatter them by jumping headfirst. Halloween costumes were often homemade sheets turned into ghosts, cardboard masks painted by hand, The crisp air carried the sound of football games from high school stadiums. With cheers echoing across small towns, winter brought wood smoke from fireplaces and frosted windows etched with children's fingerprints. Families gathered around hot cocoa after sledding or skating on frozen ponds. Christmas decorations weren't about precision, they were about joy. Strings of mismatched lights tangled around bushes, stockings hung from mantles, and the scent of pine needles mixed with sugar cookies baked in avocado green ovens. Spring was a season of renewal. Lawns were mowed for the first time, flowers bloomed along porches, and families washed cars and driveways with buckets of sudsy water. Easter eggs were hidden in backyards, and neighbors exchanged baked goods at picnics, as if it were tradition. The garage was an extension of the house, though rarely pristine. Tools hung on pegboards, bicycles leaned against walls, and coffee cans full of screws sat on shelves. It was where projects lived, half-finished birdhouses, homemade shelves, sometimes even attempts at fixing old radios or lawnmowers. For many dads, it was a sanctuary. Backyards were kingdoms. Swing sets creaked with rusted chains, plastic kiddie pools sat in patches of grass, and picnic tables bore the stains of years of use. Gardens were common rows of tomatoes, cucumbers, and beans planted each spring. Clotheslines stretched between poles. With laundry flapping in the breeze, summer nights often ended with fireflies glowing across the yard while parents sat on lawn chairs, sipping iced tea or beer, listening to cicadas hum. If you were lucky, a neighbor brought out sparklers. Kids waved glowing trails into the dark. Perhaps the strongest memory of 1980s homes was the feeling of safety. Children fell asleep with windows open, only the screen separating them from the warm night air. Doors were locked, yes, but often only at bedtime. Trust wasn't naive, it was built on community. People looked out for each other, and that made houses feel more like havens. That sense of belonging is what many miss today. Back then, the home wasn't just a place you owned. It was part of a neighborhood, part of a culture, part of a slower way of life. Every creak in the floor, every chipped step on the porch, carried with it a story. Asterisk holidays in the 1980s weren't driven by online wish lists or overnight shipping. They were hands-on, homemade, and heartfelt. Thanksgiving meant crowded dining rooms, folding chairs pulled in from the garage, and tables covered with tablecloths that only saw daylight once a year. The turkey roasted for hours, filling the house with the rich scent of butter and sage. Cranberry sauce slid out of cans with a comical thwop. Pumpkin pies cooled on counters until whipped cream crowned each slice. Christmas was magical. Trees glowed with strands of big multicolored bulbs that occasionally blinked in irregular patterns. Ornaments weren't mass-produced trends. They were a mix of handmade crafts from school, fragile glass balls, and keepsakes passed down through generations. Families decorated together, arguing good-naturedly over whether tinsel should be hung carefully or thrown by the handful. On Christmas morning, wrapping paper covered the floor like a snowfall. Gifts weren't extravagant by modern standards, but they were enough. A new bike, a favorite doll, or the latest action figure felt like treasures. Stockings overflowed with oranges, candy canes, and tiny toys. Later, families visited relatives, balancing plates of leftovers and stories that stretched late into the night. Even smaller holidays carried weight. Valentine's Day meant construction paper hearts taped to refrigerators, as in the 4th of July meant sparklers and fireworks seen from backyard lawns. Each celebration was anchored in the home, giving every holiday a sense of warmth that lingered long after. What defined the 1980s home wasn't just its appearance, it was its rhythm. Mornings began with cereal boxes lined up on the kitchen counter, kids slurping milk before racing to catch the school bus. Lunches were packed in brown paper bags or metal lunchboxes with favorite characters printed on them. Afternoons were alive with sound, the slam of screen doors, the thud of basketballs on driveways, the buzz of cicadas in the summer heat. Parents came home smelling faintly of factories, offices, or classrooms, hanging jackets by the door before collapsing into Riller. Evenings had their rituals. Local news announced the day's events. Family dinners were shared, followed by sitcom laughter echoing from the living room. Homework was done at kitchen tables, under the watchful eyes of parents who believed in neat penmanship and finished assignments. Bedtimes were strict but softened by routine brushing teeth, reading books, tucking in, and the comforting click of a hall light left on life was predictable, steady, and reassuring. A home in the 1980s wasn't just a shelter, it was a reflection of who you were. Front yards revealed pride. Some had carefully tended flower beds, others displayed flags, wind chimes, or garden gnomes. Driveways hinted at status station wagons with faux wood paneling, Chevy pickups, or maybe if you were lucky, a gleaming new Buick. Inside, walls told stories. Family portraits in wooden frames lined hallways, school photos displayed every awkward year of childhood. Souvenirs from vacations sat on shelves, alongside trophies, knickknacks, and encyclopedias nobody dared throw away. The clutter wasn't accidental, it was history. Layered and visible, guests were welcomed with coffee percolating in the kitchen, served in mugs collected over decades. The living room was always tidied before visitors arrived, even if bedrooms remained messy. Hospitality wasn't a performance, it was a way of showing care. Looking back, what stands out most about the 1980s home is not what it had, but what it didn't. There weren't screens in every room. There weren't doorbell cameras or endless online orders arriving at the porch. Homes didn't feel like showcases. They felt like lived-in spaces. Prices were reasonable enough that young families could dream of ownership. A single income could support a mortgage, leaving weekends free for barbecues, fishing trips, or afternoons at Little League games. Homes weren't investments to flip, they were anchors meant to last. Today, houses are larger, but somehow emptier. Technology has made them smarter, but less personal. Neighbors often remain strangers, and shared rituals, family dinners, block parties, even sitting together to watch TV are fading into memory. The 1980s home reminds us of something lost. The idea that simplicity can be enough. That joy can come from a backyard barbecue, from kids racing through sprinklers, from neighbors borrowing sugar. That home isn't about square footage or market value, it's about belonging, though decades have passed. The memories remain vivid for those who lived them. The creak of wood paneling, the hum of a window fan, the smell of a casserole baking in the oven, these details form the backdrop of countless childhoods. The 1980s home may not exist in the same way anymore, but its spirit lingers in nostalgia. It represents a time when life was slower, communities tighter, and families more connected. A time when homes weren't just places you lived, places you built a life. And maybe that's why they remain so powerful in memory. Because they weren't perfect. They weren't glamorous. But they were real, and they were ours.